morning, a very good evening to you, everybody, depending where you're joining us from this wonderful global community of ours. My name, of course, is Faith Mangope, and it is my absolute honor and my privilege to be with you once again this afternoon for the Stellenbosch Business Institute LeaderSHIFT series. It happens once a month. It's a high impact conversation of 45 minutes with our global leaders who are able then to just set the path and set the course for us in terms of how do we show up as leaders, exercise foresight, and become more intentional about the avenues that we're going to chart forward and hopefully take people along with us. And of course, this conversation is no different because, as you know, with the Stellenbosch Business Institute, we definitely are consulting pathways and executive learning processes that augment the way that leaders think, shift, and adapt to disruption and the future. And I must say that it's quite an opportune time to be having a conversation with this next guest, given where we find ourselves when it comes to the socio-political climate of this wonderful country of ours. And of course, I'm referring to this time, South Africa. Please help me welcome our guest for this afternoon, Bruce Whitfield, who is a multi-award-winning journalist. He is an author, he is a renowned speaker, and I'm definitely looking forward to getting into insights of his latest book, Genius, How to Thrive at the Edge of Chaos. This is going to be an interactive conversation, everybody. So what that means is that on the chat box, you just simply just state your question and leave a comment for you, and I will just make sure that that particular question or comment gets fielded into our conversation and curated into our discussion this afternoon. Bruce, thank you for making time to speak to us. Welcome to the Stellenbosch Business Institute LeaderSHIFT series. I know you're going to be looking at your clock, and I want us to get started, and thanks for joining us.
It's not so much I'm looking at my clock, Faith. I'm looking at election results. I'm looking at the Monetary Policy Committee, which is meeting as we speak. And the only thing I'm willing to predict today with any degree of certainty is that the Reserve Bank governor's voice is going to be at least 2 octaves higher than it normally is. Because, when he gets excited, he goes like that. And he's going to say, however, more often than he normally does, because suddenly the world looks very different to what it did 24 hours ago. But I'm sure we're going to talk about that.
I cannot wait to get into that. But before we get into the world, let's talk about you for a second, because as much as the world is there, and fortunately, really, an individual is a whole. And an individual is made up of many parts and many experiences, and a family comes into mind and background comes into mind, even when I speak of this. If I'm meeting you for the very first time in this conversation, all the 600 of us, who is Bruce Whitfield?
I don't know. It's a difficult question, isn't it? I mean, I actually, what I did the other day, Faith, in order to try and answer this question, I sent a question to 150 people in my phone. And I said, what do I do and what does it mean? Now, you very quickly learn who your true friends are, because 2 immediately came back and said, are you okay? Because they thought I was standing on the edge of a building and about to throw myself off. Because I've been going through a process of introspection recently, going, every day for the last 21 years, I've been very, 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 very privileged to be able to go on the radio at 6 p.m. every evening for what my children call blah, blah, which I call a career. And I have been able to take information from around the world, distill it down into something I find interesting and hopefully listeners find interesting, and translate what's happening in the world as best I can in the limited amount of time available to something meaningful and useful for my audience. But every now and again, you need to check in with people that you trust and people that you like and people that you know are going to tell you the truth, even if some of those truths are uncomfortable. And some of them were as they came flooding back. And I chose 150 people based on something called the Dunbar principle. Professor Dunbar at Oxford University is an anthropologist, and he has come up with this theory that the Dunbar number is the fact that we cannot have more than 150 meaningful relationships at the same time. So people come in your life and go out of your life at various points, and that's all a perfectly natural process, because as we grow and evolve, we go in and out of other people's lives too. And so I found that a very important question, not to discover who I am, but more to discover how I am perceived. And again, most people told me what I do. Yes, you go on the radio and you talk about business and you ask questions, sometimes difficult questions. You try and get better answers from people, and all of that is positive. But the what does it mean came back with some really valuable answers. And if you want to, we can talk about that. But who am I? I'm just a boy sitting in front of a microphone, looking for an audience to tell stories to. It starts very briefly in a farm bucky in the middle of the Free State during the Watergate crisis of 1974, when I looked at my dad with his, sorry, if you're a bit sensitive, I apologize. But in those days, artificial insemination was quite an organic process on cows. And my dad, with his hand up a cow's bum, tried to fertilize a cow that was on heat, and making sure that this very expensive bull semen that he'd imported from the Petworth estate in Sussex in England ended up in exactly the right spot to ensure that he got the best quality cattle. And I looked at this and I thought to myself, now, there's one thing I never want to have to do. So I scratched off farming and artificial insemination of cows off my list immediately. And as I was watching that, there was a man, and I still need to connect with this man. I hope he's still alive. A man called Jeremy Dawes, who hosted a show on what is today SAFM called Audio Mix. And he just brought all of this wonderful information from all over the world and collated it into something I didn't understand, something that was so foreign to me and so hard for me to contemplate as a 5-year-old, but something that sounded so magical and so powerful. And the most important part was he started work at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and finished at 6. And I thought, now there's a job I can do. Little did I know that it takes a little bit of thought preparation and a little bit of planning, as you know, Faith, from many years on the radio as well. It takes a lot of work to make things sound effortless. And so, yeah, that was where the aspiration to play on the radio was born. I never really thought I'd get a chance to do it, really. And through a series of lucky breaks and I suppose the refusal to never say no to a job, even if it meant going and being spat at, not on purpose, but just because he was very spitty, by Eugene Terreblanche and others, I got my first reporting gig at an AWB rally for 702 in probably April of 1993. And from there I was told you could be useful. Come and be a part of the team, and worked with 702 for a while. Went to the United Kingdom, worked in radio stations there, had a couple of really nice breaks there. Returned to South Africa, ran a newsroom, discovered I was a terrible manager of human beings, made me a horrible person, so stopped doing that. And went into financial journalism in the year of 2000, where I was hired by an entrepreneur by the name of Alec Hogg, who ran a business called MoneyWeb in those days. He subsequently sold out and started a new business. And it soon became very clear to everybody who was working in the business that in the early inquiries as to who I was and what I did, and they said, so what would you like to know from us in the interview process? I said, this all-share index that you talk about, the stock market thing, well, this is what I want to learn about, and I know nothing about it, and you guys seem to know everything, so I'm coming here to learn. And about 2 weeks in, I was called into a meeting with a panel of very solemn individuals to say, you have to leave now. You have to go. I said, but why? We hardly know each other. And they said, we know enough. We've never met anybody more clueless than you. I said, but I told you. And they said, yes, we heard you, but we didn't believe you. We've never met anybody more clueless. And that set up a really rapid learning curve, where out of simply, I suppose, a mixture of sheer desperation, curiosity, and a desire to switch direction from general news reporting into becoming a financial journalist. One of the most rapid learning curves ever. And I've, as I said, had the privilege for 21 years of hosting the Money Show. Through ebbs and flows, through crises and excitement, through moments of great joy and moments of great sadness. Of course, the night we went into a lockdown, I had a complete dignity collapse, of course, on that first night as I was sent a piece of audio. And that's a wonderful thing about being in this business for a long time, is that people learn to trust you with things. And I got a piece of audio. It came through at 27 minutes past 5 in the afternoon. I'm not really answering your question, but I'm taking the Kgalema Motlanthe approach, by the way, as I deviate.
Where you
And
get to talk, and then you don't, and then you basically avoid answering my questions, isn't it?
Exactly. Kgalema
I
Motlanthe.
see.
Kgalema Motlanthe, briefly a very good president of South Africa's, in between Thabo Mbeki and Jacob Zuma. I introduced him one day at a conference. He was meant to speak for 20 minutes. He spoke for the full 40. I went on stage. I said, what? He said, I knew that you were wanting to ask me questions. I didn't want to answer them. So I spoke for the full 40 minutes. So that's what I'm doing here.
Well, let me then interject there and make sure that you do answer some of the questions, because I'm sure the questions are not
No.
going to be coming in from just myself, but different people that are wanting to react and relate with you this afternoon. So first of all, thank goodness that you did not give up, and thank goodness you did not choose the other career path of sticking your hand in a
Mm,
cow's bum. That
mm,
would have been a very
mm.
precarious
It's very
situation that we
important. Look,
find ourselves in.
it's very important. And yeah, I don't think I shook hands with my dad for years after that. Give him a hug. That's more
I
important.
will not be disappointed. Well, let's talk a little bit about, some of the career paths that we find ourselves in, but also perhaps the life journey that many South Africans are waking up to. And I think South Africans, a lot of them today, as with we will see with the rest of the global community, where you're going to have about 50% or so of democracies in this global community of ours participating in one election or the other. That means change. That means having to adapt to a new normal that did not exist 5 years ago, or maybe one would say 10 years ago, depending if the person was sitting in for 2 terms or for 1 term. South Africa wakes up to that new reality this morning as a voter counting has started, and we're seeing different shifts. We're in what I call the shift in the consciousness of South Africa's political landscape. Bruce, as you're looking at the numbers and you're really taking, a gander at the political climate and the sentiments, how do we show up in this time of uncertainty? I don't want to call it chaos yet, but I think there's an air of uncertainty of what South Africa's future looks like. And for those of us that are joining you from different parts of the world, what does this uncertainty look like for other communities and other democracies that are about to participate in a voting system?
I'm less worried about other democracies. I'm more concerned about our own, quite frankly, because what we've seen happen over the last 36 hours, as polls opened at 7 o'clock yesterday morning, and the IEC, through thick and thin, has battled to put on this election, a most contested election in our history, 70 parties. I mean, lots of paper, lots of people very confused as to where they put their crosses. But I think ultimately what we've shown is that South Africa very much is a very robust democracy, a democracy where you are able to create a political party, where you are able to put forward a political view, and you put it open to public inspection. And the public certainly inspected yesterday, and we've got about 20% of the votes counted so far. So far, it looks like the DA will retain the Western Cape. The rest of the country, the ANC looks like it's pretty much in control everywhere. It'll have to do a coalition, it would seem, in the Northern Cape. It's getting walloped in KwaZulu-Natal, as many people forecast that it would. Early indications are that Jacob Zuma's MK party is coming through very, very strongly in that particular province, and that will come with its own set of consequences, of course. Gauteng is headed for further coalitions. Whether the kingmaker there may very well be the Democratic Alliance, certainly based on the early part of the vote that has been counted so far. Now, remember, as part of this sort of voting process, you get the urban vote coming in first, and then you get the much more disparate rural votes coming through later. So things could change, but the CSIR is predicting a very serious defeat for the ANC, which you'll remember came in at 57.5% at the last elections, Cyril Ramaphosa's first elections, which was a decline from the Jacob Zuma era, and is now forecast to come in at 42%, which surprises me, and I think will surprise many, many other people who expected the ANC to squeak in a percentage point either side of 50%. So what is happening here is democracy in action, and that's going to make a lot of people really uncomfortable. Can I give you the title of my first book, The Upside of Down? If there is an upside of down of this change, it is that nobody in the ANC is doing a Donald Trump and saying, let's march to the barricades. Nobody is saying this is an illegitimate election outcome. Nobody is calling it to question the democratic process in South Africa. To me, that is possibly the biggest win that many people 10, 15 years ago would not have dreamed would be possible at what was an inevitable decline in the ANC. You cannot be in power for 30 years without upsetting some people. It turns out that the ANC seems to have upset a lot more people than even it anticipated. In the run-up to this election, it was very interesting to see the psychology of the ANC and the psychology of the president. He renewed the SARS Commissioner Edward Kieswetter's contract. That was coming up for renewal in April, and he left it quite late. And Edward Kieswetter was adamant that he was not available for another 5-year term. He was exhausted by fixing the catastrophe that Tom Moyane had left behind. And he's committed to a further 3 years from April this year. And Lesitya Kganyago, the most respected central banker in the world in the year 2020, judged by his central banking peers, who has served 2 full terms, 5-year terms, had his contract renewed for a further 5-year term, and that was done early. Only had to be done in November. but the president sought to get that appointment in early, again, really ensuring that key institutions of state remain under solid management. And Leslie Kganyago today has just left interest rates unchanged. I'm not sure of his reasoning. I can guess it, and that is that the world is volatile and uncertain, and we've certainly seen our currency weaken today on those projections of the ANC falling, because the immediate assumption is that the ANC is going to have to go into coalition, and if it is quite weak, in other words, below 46, 45%, it is going to need a fairly strong partner. Now, the assumption here is it has to go either for the EFF, which itself is looking fairly vulnerable as its support appears at this early stage to be declining. Much of that support leaving the ANC, leaving the EFF for something that voters may perceive to be more radical or something that they identify with better. And MK is sort of coming in neck and neck with the EFF at the moment. Will the ANC do that? Well, it'll be interesting to see if they do or if they don't. Certainly Business Leadership South Africa, Business Unity South Africa, and all those business organizations which have been working very closely with government in an effort to try and stop the economy from going over the edge and to try and restore everything from infrastructure to water supply to roads and rail and all electricity, which has been fairly successful up until now. The business is saying, if you guys go as the ANC into coalition with parties with whom we cannot align ideologically, so nationalizing, raising taxes, that sort of stuff, we're out. We will not support you. And that seemed fairly prescient as well, because Busi Mavuso did that on Monday. And then I was also speaking to other business leaders over the last 48 hours or so, and in full support of her action on that particular front. So yeah, everything is up for change. But here is the thing: this isn't Zimbabwe. This isn't a democracy which is going to be corrupted and stolen. We've had enough corruption and stealing up until this point. This is democracy, as uncomfortable as it may make you feel right now. This is what South Africans are feeling. They're angry at the ANC, the ANC, which for the first half of our democracy, the first 15 years of our democracy, was a very, very successful 15 years. We got our investment grade back. We got interest rates down from the National Party era of high 20% interest rates as they battled the weirdness of their ideology. Interest rates came down. Inflation came down. We saw economic growth of 4 and 5 and nearly 6% in 1 year, if memory serves. And between 1994 and about 2008, we actually saw 7 or 8 million jobs being created in South Africa. There was expansion, there was hope, there was optimism. Then we got the three horsemen of the economic apocalypse, and that was the global financial crisis. We ran out of electricity. That's the one failure of the Mbeki era, was the underinvestment in electricity. And then we got Jacob Zuma into the mix as well. And also, I think today is a very clear signal from the world that South Africans are fairly fed up with the ANC and its refusal to deal with elephants in the room. And Jacob Zuma has been an elephant in the room for an awfully long time, and they keep getting him get out of jail free cards from the Monopoly game, and have refused to make him deal with the consequences of his actions, his destructive actions in our country for so long, that I'm afraid, if you don't like the change, there's a reason for change, and the reasons for change are absolutely sound. You may not like the outcomes of that change, but you do have to learn how to navigate the uncertainty that change is going to bring.
Well, actually, I want us to zero in on the navigation of that uncertainty in itself. You know, Bruce, a lot of people are thinking not just as leaders of organizations, but people are thinking as leaders within their homes, as mothers, as fathers, as people who have to think about what kind of a South Africa will my children inherit? And what kind of a legacy will this country actually have? And I'm just making, reference to a low-hanging fruit. For example, we had something called the National Development Plan, well, we still do, right, of 2030, where we do, and when where we actually were touted that in order for us to.
Do you know how I know it still exists? Because when I got my vaccine for COVID, I got a little on the vaccine that said NDP, and I went, "Oh, that looks familiar. What's that?" I Googled it and said National Development Plan. It still exists. Yes, it does still exist. But what a wasted opportunity that was. My goodness me. Anyway,
100%. It is a wasted opportunity. And when we're looking at exactly what we needed to achieve in order for us to realize the objectives of the National Development Plan, we needed to grow by something like 5% of the economy. The economy is teetering about what, 0.6%? Some are saying not 1.5%, depending on which kind of values you're taking into consideration. And a lot of people are internalizing all of these changes that are happening in the country, saying, does that mean, Bruce, I get my family out? Am I supposed to move to Australia or Lesotho or anywhere else in the world where it's going to offer me a better opportunity of success than where we find ourselves in now? And I think a little bit of an uncertainty, as we would have witnessed within the dawn of democracy of 1994, where people were also, uncertain about this future in the country, and were also playing around with the idea of, do I stay, do I leave, what happens to my family, what happens to my legacy? Where do we find our sentiment today, and what would you advise?
Oh, it's an impossible question, isn't it? I mean, when I talk to people like Adrian Gore and Robbie Brosen and Brian Joffe, people who founded businesses in truly the darkest time of our most recent history. And for Brosen and Joffe, it was 1987. The Rubicon speech was cooling. South Africa, the divestment had happened out of South Africa. It had defaulted on its loans. We truly were a basket case of a country. And both Robbie Brosen and Brian Joffe, I said, why did you start your particular businesses? Nando's in the case of Brosen and Bidvest in the case of Joffe. And Joffe looked at me and he said, well, there was an opportunity, so I took it. And because in times of uncertainty, and the one thing that I've noticed, and one of the themes that I reflect on in the book Genius: How to Thrive at the Edge of Chaos, is that our history shows that those who are able to navigate noise and uncertainty, those who are able to navigate the deep discomfort of a current political reality that they may feel, or economic reality that they feel, but who are driven by this desire to create something, build something, see an opportunity to exploit it in an environment. Those people are people who invariably are likely to be more successful than others. Adrian Gore, in the week that he is contemplating giving up a perfectly solid job as an actuary at Liberty, and he goes over to meet a young banker called Laurie Dippenard, who runs a merchant bank called RMB. He goes over to see Laurie Dippenard. He says, I've got this idea to reshape health insurance. And they are aligned in terms of a democracy coming to South Africa, a public healthcare system designed primarily to serve white people that is going to come under huge strain as the doors open to everybody. And there's going to be a need for private healthcare for millions of South Africans as the economy comes out of a period of National Party rule, and theoretically becomes a fairer and more equal place. People are going to want choices. And so they re-engineer the way medical aids, which did exist back then, were working, and they re-engineered it and created what is a global multinational today with vitality programs in 30 different countries across 45 different life insurers, with Discovery having a 20% stake in Ping An Health, the health division of the biggest insurance company in the world. And these are people who, at times of uncertainty like this, have knuckled down and gone, where is the opportunity? Cut out the noise and the clutter. Is there an opportunity here that no matter who runs the place, no matter who and how it is run, there is always going to be a need for this product or this service or this offering, and they've pushed forward with it, and they've then taken their smart ideas global. And that was the whole pretext of the book, where we've got some phenomenal entrepreneurs with some phenomenal ideas, with a huge work ethic, who have built their businesses in South Africa, looking for new markets. Some have looked to de-risk and move elsewhere. Some have simply run out of runway in South Africa and have had to go global with their businesses. And we are 0.38% of global GDP in dollar terms. And we are a tiny, tiny, tiny economy. And yet you look at the representation of our superstars around the world, whether it be Rassie and Sia and a remarkable Springbok rugby team, whether it be remarkable businesses that box above their weight in markets where they operate. It's nothing short of astounding as to the ingenuity of people who, a bit like diamonds that of carbon that under compression and pressure turn into diamonds. We are at a tipping point, and it's up to us to choose, frankly, how we respond to that tipping point. Things are certainly going to change, and it's up to us as to how we harness that change. Or is it for more dysfunction, more infighting, more corruption, more more destruction of the public good? Or do we seize this as an opportunity to say, right, guys, listen, there's a burning platform here. We really need to move in everybody's best interests. And I appreciate that it's far, far harder to do than to speak about. But really, we have a choice right now, either to use this constructively or to fold our arms in despair and cry in a bucket, which helps nobody.
Absolutely. I've got questions that are coming in thick and fast. So I'm going to just mention the questions and then we'll go into some of the answers as well. And please do keep sending them so that we can get them close to Bruce. As it Paul Tanton asking the question, Bruce, how do you keep pace when writing a topical book when the environment you write about keeps changing?
Paul Tanton, he's always been very nosy and nerdy. He was my senior at primary school, you see. Hello, Paul. I don't know, Paul. I think having a mild case of ADHD helps in terms of not really paying attention to the detail. But it is, and the problem with the two books that I've written is that they are snapshots at a period of time. They're a balance sheet, if you like, in the same way as a balance sheet is a financial statement of a recent period, and it'll be a useful reference point in the future, but it isn't one of these business books that is evergreen and everlasting. So it is one where you look at key themes and you try to draw on the history lessons of the success of the past, and you try and extrapolate that in some way into the future. But yes, it is the everlasting curse of somebody who's been trained in a news environment and you'll know this, Faith. I mean, somebody says to you, so what did you do yesterday? You say, I don't know. I'm too busy focusing on today. Well, I'm too worried. I know what the news agenda is going to be tomorrow, so I need to be thinking forward. And so in media, I think we're thinking forward the whole time. And in that way, it stops us stagnating, becoming stale, I hope. And yeah, writing books I write them quickly. So you get them done in 3 months, get them to the publishers, push the publishers, get them out as quickly as possible. I was rereading bits of The Upside of Down, which I wrote toward the end of 2019 the other day, and the elements of that have dated. I was asked to be the patron of a wonderful, I'm going to use this platform now, you must all support the Starfish Great Hearts Foundation. I was just asked this morning to reignite my being a patron of the Starfish Great Hearts Foundation, which does enormous work across all provinces of South Africa. And it reminded me of a passage out of the book in terms of childhood stunting and how poor kids in poor communities, if they're not properly nourished and if they're not properly fed and sleep well and feel safe from the ages of 0 to 6, how it sets them back for the rest of their lives. And the Starfish Great Hearts Foundation's focus is very much on that. So many of the issues with which we deal today are historical. Many of the issues that we need to deal with into the future are a reflection of those historical issues. So it's a long way of saying, Paul, I don't know how I do it, but I try to be useful, if that helps.
I think it helps definitely. Trevor Harris asks the question, hello, Bruce. So where do you think gold and silver will end in price over the next 1 to 3 years?
No, I'm not doing that. I'm not playing that game. I haven't a clue. I don't know. They may go up or they may go down or stay roughly the same. I don't know, Faith. I don't know. If I knew,
I like that.
I'd become a commodity trader and make a fortune instead of being a hack and tell tales for a living.
Here's something that you mentioned a bit earlier on, but I think it gives us an opportune moment to actually touch on. And it's brought on by Joanna Petersen saying, dear Bruce, what is your opinion on the signing of the National Health Insurance Bill? Obviously, with some of the decisions that were taken by government and solidified by government, part of it was the signing of the NHI.
So I don't know if this is going to work, but I had a peak in my career the other day. I had a career highlight, and it's one of those things where if I had any money, I would retire. Zapiro did a cartoon, Government's Miracle Week, in which he talks about Cyril Ramaphosa being wheeled out to sign a whole bunch of bills, the anti-GBV bill, public education, basic education bill, biodiversity, NHI, and basic income grant. And I made a comment on the radio last week saying to somebody very wise, I said, where's the president found a magic money tree? And Zapiro used the magic money tree with a very nice credit there, saying apologies to Bruce Whitfield for the magic money tree. I've been credited in a Zabira cartoon, and there can, other than today with you, Faith, there can be no other career highlight. But it is, I mean, it's just bizarre to me. And again, reflected, I think, probably ANC internal polling saying, how do we get this thing over the line? Let's be seen to do something. We've done so little for so long. If we look busy now, maybe people will forgive us. Certainly the early stages of these results are suggesting that our memories are longer than last week, which is probably a good thing. So what do I think of the NHI bill? I think it's a well-intentioned plan that is not feasible based on the severe dislocation in our economy, the fact that we don't have growth that creates the jobs that provides the opportunity for people to get into the tax net to make a contribution so that more people are funding the needs of fewer people. Right now, you've got a very few people funding the needs of many, and that's not a balance that works in the long term, unfortunately.
Another question. Sean Duval says, "Hi Bruce, what would your advice be to the politicians, ooh, here's a nice one, who need to thrive in the potential chaos of governing in a coalition? What mindset shifts do they need?" Good luck with this one.
No, it's actually very simple. Stop thinking about yourself and think about the job. What is the job? You've been asked by an electorate to represent them, not to feather your own nest, not to act in your own interest or act in your party's interest, but to take decisions that lead to clean water, electricity, roads that are usable, rail that functions, ports that work. You do that. You do that. And the rest of us will utilize the product of your hard work to grow this economy. It's actually not complicated. So the mindset you need is, how do we make the place work, not how do we extract from the place? Do that, and we're away from the road to nowhere to a road to somewhere, which is better, I think.
You had Celine saying, "What are your thoughts on South African business leadership in sub-Saharan Africa? It unfortunately has not been terribly successful, and where it should have been dominated, it falls miserably behind, especially to the Chinese."
So, again, I got Whitey Basson to swear twice in the NG Kerk in Franschhoek last year. It was another career highlight, because I know how to push his buttons. Whitey Basson very successfully was the guy who grew ShopRite into the giant that it is, and he was very firmly of the view that the African continent was one that needed to be served by ShopRite, and he went out quite aggressively into African markets. And since his retirement, of course, Peter Engelbrecht, his successor, has pulled back ShopRite away from African markets because it's a very hard place to make money. China and Chinese businesses have got a far longer term view. They've got the advantage of huge pools of capital that South Africa and South African businesses don't have. So while I was very critical at one stage of South African businesses going in and out and tap dancing in and out and not being able to make long-term decisions, I fully accept that many of these markets are very different to what South African business leaders are used to. They are often economies that are vulnerable to big switches in the global economy. Nigeria, for example, has seen the naira fall out of bed. We've seen many African economies struggle as oil prices have vacillated because they become so addicted to single commodities, for example, and so dependent on those single commodities for their foreign exchange that they haven't diversified their economies. And so many of our retailers and our banks have actually been pretty successful in many parts of the African continent, and are continue to do well. Sanlam, through its acquisition of Saham, is doing very well in parts of the African continent, also north of the Sahara as well, places like Morocco and others. So I think there's a mixed bag of success and failure, of assumptions and delivery. But I think it's the logistics of getting product into many parts of Africa is really hard. And the volatility of the environments in which they go to trade is very, very difficult and unpredictable as well. We've seen so many South African companies seriously burn their fingers in these economies. And for executive teams, as they go into these economies, they're not going to, bet the farm and say, we believe that Nigeria is the next big growth market, or that nice President Ruto in Kenya seems to be playing global geopolitics better than everyone else. So we're going to all go and invest there, although we'd like to see a bit of a trend that way in the next couple of years, because he's got geography on his side. He certainly is not playing partisan global politics, so he's well positioned there. I have empathy for business leaders in other parts, operating from here into other parts of Africa. These markets are deeply complex. They're very different from South Africa, and based on what I've studied about people who have tried and failed and some who've succeeded, it's never easy. It's always much easier to make money at home if you carve out your dominant path in this market, of which there's plenty of space to grow. Just two quick examples. I mean, 20 years ago, Faith, you'll remember, I'm not trying to date you or anything like that in terms of what you will remember and don't remember, but I'm thinking
Careful.
20 years is safe. 20 years is safe. There were 15 million people who couldn't get a bank account in South Africa because they were unbankable. And today, Capitec is the biggest retail bank in the country, 22 million customers. You've got Bank Zero, you've got Time Bank, you've got Discovery Bank, you've got African Bank making a bit of a comeback as well, each with millions of customers. Now, people are multi-banked and they've got bank accounts across different banks and things, and absolutely. But by thinking differently about your business models and serving the market that needs it, you do very well. So many South African retailers went and blew billions of rand in Europe and in Australia and different parts of the world, paying far too much for businesses that they should never have invested in the first place. But because of this, in some cases, boardroom mindset where people are in panic mode, it's a case of like, we better go and get some foreign exchange earnings. Let's go quickly. What's for sale? Grab that. It's got shiny buckles on the shoes. We like that. Let's get Shiny Buckle Shoe Company into our portfolio, and that'll give us foreign exchange and give us a hedge. And many did that. A guy called David Neal came from the United Kingdom, where he worked in a big retail pharmacy chain called Boots, and he became the chief executive of Clicks. And at the time, you might have expected Clicks, which was hair dryers and soap and shampoo and quite a disparate group of products. He saw the opportunity to put pharmacy into Clicks in a very serious way. So you go into Clicks, you go through the beauty products, you go and get your diabetes medicine, and then you buy chocolate in the queue on the way out, which gets you back next month to go and get the diabetes medicine again. I'm being obviously facetious about this, but a really fine business model. How many Click stores has South Africa got outside of? How many Clicks stores has Clicks got out of South Africa? Zero. Because David Neal, the British businessman, brought into Clicks to find new opportunities, said the growth market is here. And in the same way as Capitec, not batting outside of its home turf. Clicks not batting outside of its home turf. Finding opportunities at home has been far more rewarding than casting the net wider.
So it could say, what might be the impact of national election outcomes on the local government's positioning for 2026?
We have to do this all again. Oh my goodness me! I thought we were done. I'm curious about this because I'm interested to see how the DA in the Western Cape performs, because I think we can say objectively that it is a province that functions better than other provinces. It is got municipalities that function at a higher level than municipalities in many other provinces, and if you start seeing if you start seeing their majority decline in the Western Cape, then you've got to question whether voters truly appreciate good governance and understand the power of what happens in well-governed environments. And I think that'll be quite telling in terms of what happens in the local government elections coming up in the next 2 years or so, because if you can't reward performance, then what is it all about? So I'm hoping an electorate, whatever we learn from these elections, is able to extrapolate those lessons into higher functioning, better municipalities into the future, because that's where we all feel it, isn't it? I mean, that's where we feel the impact first of whether or not local government is working for us. It's whether or not we've got our lights are on, whether or not the water's running, whether you flush the loo, the sewage goes away and the rubbish is collected. All of that very simple stuff has to be done properly. And if we don't appreciate where it is done properly, then I would have some concerns about the choices that voters make.
Yeah. I've got about 5 minutes with you, so I'm also being mindful of time. But I want us to zero in a little bit more on the book, Bruce. Genius, How to Thrive at the Edge of Chaos. And, by even starting the book term with genius, does chaos present us opportunities to actually be a cut above the rest in terms of the way that we think, feel, act, and actualize? And those of us who are in panic mode, because there are those of us who are in distress, those of us who are in panic mode, how do we overcome that level of panic so that we can get into the level of creativity and hopefully actualize better so that we can and can take advantage of a crisis moment?
It takes a very particular mindset, and it does take that ability to drown out the noise. Noah Yuval Harari, who is the historian who wrote *Sapiens*, he says, true power means knowing what to ignore. True power means knowing what to ignore. Now, here's the difficult thing. What do you ignore and what don't you ignore? And for the most successful leaders that I've studied over the last 20, 25 years, it's that is the one thing that has defined those who've been truly successful against those who have floundered, bungled their way through it, who've not succeeded, is that ability to know that they can be single-minded and focused on building a solution to a problem, and they address a problem. They can't fix everything, but they know that they can address a particular set of problems or a particular problem in a society, and they focus only in on that. They listen to the same radio shows, they part of the same WhatsApp groups, they go to the same places, they hang out with the same people, they get the same information as all of us do, but they have this ability to discern between what does matter and doesn't matter. And I think if you can define what it is that does matter, as opposed to what everyone else around you is screaming and shouting about, then you have a far better chance of carving a path. He's not politically correct these days. He wrote the Jungle Book. He wrote some very stirring Victorian poetry. But a guy called Rudyard Kipling did do one thing absolutely well. And he wrote something called Desiderata. And he said, if you can keep your head about you when all about you are losing theirs, etc., 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 it is about keeping your head about you in times of uncertainty. Running around in a circle and panicking and shouting fire, fire, fire doesn't put out the fire. And it's as uncomfortable as it is right now. Before we go, there's a quote that Christo Visa. People often accuse me of name dropping, Faith, and I'm sorry about that. If you feel that I am name dropping, because I was chatting to
That's
Richard
good.
Branson the one.
It's good.
I was chatting to Richard Branson the one day, and he told me he'd introduced Nelson Mandela to the Dalai Lama. Now that's name dropping. All I'm doing is reporting. And Christo Visa said to me the one day, he thought it was a Jan Smuts quote, but Jan Smuts' biographer emailed me to say it wasn't. It was a letter to Jan Smuts in the 1930s, probably. And it's the quote is, South Africa is that bizarre kind of place where things are never as bad as they could be, but never as good as they should be. Now, that's nearly 100 years ago. And I fear that we fail to learn from our past. We fail to figure out that, again, if you just have to watch Chasing the Sun, one or two or both, and once you've dried your eyes, you are able to figure out that we are stronger together, that we are a far better unified in a common purpose, and a common purpose that has to be led by leaders with a vision that says today is unacceptable, tomorrow has to be better. And I don't know if this election brings that, but certainly this election looks like it may break some incredibly destructive and bad and negative habits that we've allowed to consume us as a society. And I think on balance, the history books will say that today was an important day, or yesterday was an important day, and today, when the counting happens, was equally important. But in the meantime, yeah, it is going to be unsettling. It is going to be uncomfortable. But unfortunately, this was never going to be an easy process.
Absolutely not. Look, I appreciate the time that you've really taken out to have a conversation with us this afternoon. And I think that what we can actually take out of this conversation is, and I love the part where you say, silence the noise and exercise discernment about what to listen to, what not to listen to. But I think most importantly, live life with intentionality. If you're going to be a leader, then be intentional about the South Africa that you're trying to build for yourself and for those around you. So at least that is what I took away from this conversation that we've had together. And I think it's beautiful to say, silence the noise and learn to live with discernment and learn to live with intentionality, with which we appreciate for you being so insightful for us this afternoon, Bruce.
Hey, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for taking time. I'm sure you had other things to do, but thank you for spending the time with us. Really, really kind of you to do that. So it was wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. And this is where we leave it for this edition for LeaderSHIFT
Already.
series, courtesy of the
But can
Stellenbosch
we
Business
carry on?
Institute.
I'm having
Please note,
fun.
Uh, we'll definitely invite you back again. But as you know, that it happens once a month. So Bruce will be back hopefully very soon to give us another 45 minutes of really high impact conversations where we really get to encourage you to shift in the way that you act, shift in the way that you are, shift in the way that you would like to see